I am but a simple wanderer, gracious lady, who sometimes walks at night on paths little trodden, seeking refuge in the light of the stars."
Hearing him say this, the boy rolled his eyes. "Has Thorin heard my silent plea?" the woman asked. Though the tone of her voice still quivered slightly, her fingers gripped tighter around his hand. "Have you come to save me?"
Well..."
He scratched the back of his neck with his free hand and gestured to the lad with a nod of his head.
"Actually, that was more the young soldier of the consecrated blade here."
Though he said it in jest, it then occurred to him that, yes, she was blind and probably took him by his word. Should it be that way? Perhaps it was for the best. However, when the woman heard the man with her take a startled breath and felt him let go of her, she asked, "What happened?"
"You idiot!"
the wanderer chastised the boy harshly.
"Why didn't you say anything?"
"I didn't want to disturb you two," the child groaned with a grin. "Is he wounded?" The winds ran through the wanderer. He hadn't even heard the woman approach.
"Nasty. I can take care of the wound, no problem. But he will need bed rest,"
he answered her. Then he saw her reach out her hand to them. "The least I can do is offer you my home to cure you."
"And how would you know where that is? You have been kidnapped, have you not?"
"I have a very good memory. All my life I could not see, yet I grew up here. I probably know more about where I am than you do, simple wanderer." Actually, he would have liked to just leave. But he couldn't leave the boy like that, and the woman certainly wouldn't be able to carry him. He clenched his left hand into a fist so that the leather creaked.
"All right,"
he finally decided.
"Just let me tend to the wound and then I'll follow you."
And to that he thought to himself,
"Strange as it sounds, following a blind woman."
For in the meantime the boy had lost consciousness and was already beginning to fever. The wanderer had a very uneasy feeling about this. As he looked out of the window, he saw an orange-red streak on the horizon. They had walked all night and now it was already dawn. The rays of the sun reached far into the night's firmament and made it gradually fade. "You are looking out of the window?" he heard the woman behind him ask. He looked at her over his shoulder. She was staring in his approximate direction.
"How do you know?"
She smiled and took a cauldron from a cupboard here in the kitchen. "One doesn't just see with their eyes, simple wanderer." So far she had consistently called him that.
"I'm not very comfortable around cities,"
he remarked, looking out the window again. There was a great wall on the horizon, reaching higher than the hut they were in. White and gold banners of the consecrated blade hung down from the towers, swaying lightly in the wind. From here, the guards on the wall were nothing more than black and brown streaks, framed by the glow of the rising sun. "Is that why you sneak around in the night, then?"
"I was hardly sneaking,"
he replied. He didn't like the direction the conversation seemed to be going, or worse, what if she already knew he was the Black Wolf? His eyelids were heavy as it was and he would have to sleep soon. For the last few 100 meters, he had used the power of his mind to make his body shuffle here more than walk upright. The leaden exhaustion just made his arm drop as he let go of the curtain and stepped away from the window. Meanwhile, the woman had poured the kettle full of water, put wood in the stove, lit it and put the kettle on. For a woman who had narrowly escaped a fatal fate, she was surprisingly calm, he thought to himself. Just then she was adding lily-like petals to the water, which were pink and fading into white towards the tips. "Navatandril petals," she explained. Had she sensed his gaze? It was probably a wise idea not to put all his cards on the table right away, so he asked,
"What is this?"
"You don't know?" This seemed to astonish her to such an extent that she paused in what she was doing.
"I'm admittedly new to the wanderer business,"
he defended himself, and at that she had to grin.
"What?"
he asked. "How you said it! Wanderer business!" She didn't stop smiling and continued. "But for being new, you could fight very well."
"I did have the little one's help."
He gestured over his shoulder with his thumb and took a seat at the round table in the middle of the room. It was a rustic piece of furniture. The whole dwelling looked as if it had been beaten together with a bare stone until it simply held, without any nails, glue or brushwood. The boy was lying in a bed in the next room. At least that made a comfortable impression, and now made him wonder how long it had been since he had lain in one. But since it was the only bed here, he would probably not only have to wait to find out. For him it was also safe to assume that the woman lived here alone. Now she handed him a mug of Navatandril flower tea and sat facing him.
"If I'm not mistaken, and I firmly believe I am not,"
she now began.
"then the boy had heard one of the three. You, however."
She waved her head. Somehow the way she kept staring like that crept him out. What if she really was seeing more than she was letting on? He had to get out of here as soon as possible. But could he just leave the boy behind like that?
Yes. I believe you struck down two and let one get away."
She sipped the tea and he decided to do the same. He wouldn't be able to sleep that quickly, he realized. She could hand him over to the consecrated blade. The tea smelled as he had always known it, like honey, if one stood in a willow while sniffing it. The taste, however, was bittersweet, like a walnut with a sweet note. But the drink did not fail to have its well-known effect. He became livelier, even though he could still feel the tiredness, as if it was continuously trying to pull his head back onto his neck.
Do you want an answer to that?
He finally said when she didn't stop staring at him.
No. Forgive me. I am too curious, I suppose."
Now setting down the mug she had warmed her hands on earlier, she reached to unclip her dark blonde hair and toss it over her shoulders.
"I am grateful to you with all my heart for your rescue. Without you and your friend, I would not have escaped with only a scare."
She cradled her head. To him, it looked more and more as if her eyes were looking into another world.
"I'm just wondering,"
she then began.
"why did you let him go?"
He almost choked at the question.
But what now?
He cleared his throat and then continued.
Did you have such a thirst for blood?
Her hands balled into fists on the table.
"All my life, I have wandered the surrounding forest and not once have I been ambushed. Elrond is nearby and I have never heard of scoundrels prowling around the surrounding areas of such towns like this."
The wanderer's neck itched badly at those words.
What were you doing out so late anyway?
"Walking, I was. But I guess it was silly of me to think at least here all was still well with the world. I can't believe there are men who lust after a female body like that. We are sentient beings too."
The wanderer grumbled. He took a generous sip of the tea. In his mind he agreed with her, but for him the whole world was a godless abyss, full of people robbing and killing each other and taking whatever they wanted.
"Or do you see it differently?"
she asked him now and continued straight away.
"I mean, I know that women, for example, are not allowed in the ranks of the consecrated blade, but—"
She sighed.
Actually there are.
He bit his tongue.
Where on earth had he gotten the idea to tell her about Atreya and Shira?
No one, except him, including a very few other exceptions, even knew about the four venerable blades.
So among the elves,
he started again.
There are supposed to be women in the military, even in leading positions up to the throne.
She shook her head gently.
"That sounds like a better world to me. Why aren't we women allowed into, how shall I put this, certain areas?"
He shrugged his shoulders.
I don't know. I'm just
a simple wanderer.
Her smile widened again.
"Right. And I sob all over your surely tired ears with my problems."
That's all right.
Images of his childhood in Aston came to his mind.
I know what it feels like to be oppressed.
"Is that why you don't like cities and creep in the night? You avoid people, don't you?"
He smirked.
Perhaps.
"Did they hurt you a lot?"
At that moment he was glad she couldn't see him. He loathed it when that feeling surfaced inside him and began to brew in his chest. He took notice when her hand sought his, and when she found it, it rested on his right.
"You don't have to talk about it. My curiosity, please, forgive me."
She clasped his hand now, and to be on the safe side, he took his left from the table.
"I just want to let you know that not all people are like that."
That's a really strong thing to say after you.
He shook his head.
I'm sorry.
"You mean the three men, don't you? Should I let my whole life be poisoned by the outrages, or treat all people with an inordinate distrust?"
It might save your life.
"Perhaps. But what have I left of my life, tell me, if I poison it with such distrust? and separate all others from me in this way.
Her hand gripped his more firmly. It had been a long time since he had felt a woman's touch. It had been a long time since he had felt anyone's touch at all in that respect. One had to be blind, he thought, to have the courage to reach out for a monster's hand. Her hand was smaller and more delicate than his.
Is this how you live, simple wanderer? Is this how you spend your days?
No. He took his hand from hers. His chest ached and the feeling was already squeezing him, if only a little.
Why do you want to know all this?
He finally asked her.
Why don't you just be content with the fact that you are still alive?
If you are creeping in the night all the time, you will never see the sun, never the light.
I have seen it. Why do you think I prefer to walk at night? And if that were not the case, who would have saved you?
That is true. And certainly, I have Thorin to thank for that. But perhaps Thorin allowed you into my life for a special reason.
Perhaps, he lied. He did not believe in Thorin or any other god. It wasn't that he didn't think they existed. He just wasn't interested in them. Much like they didn't seem interested in him. In his opinion, he was in control of his own destiny.
Perhaps to lure you out of the night into the day?
He heard her ask.
No thanks. I like it the way it is.
Then let me share in the beauty of the night. What lures you so into it?
He would have preferred to tell her that it was not a lure but an escape. He had been forced into it.
There is a saying,
he began instead, emptying his cup in one last draught.
At night, all wolves are black.
She hummed, thoughtfully. The look in her blue eyes began to wander.
Lorelei Lilac Feather?
No.
Then who is it from?
The elves.
No particular name?
I learned it from a wandering sun elf.
Ah, the kind that has the dragon fire warriors, isn't it?
He eyed her sullenly, and as if sensing this, she spoke in a thoughtful tone.
I know. I do know that anything magical is forbidden by the king, but...
She sighed again and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear.
The world would be a dull place so completely without the touch of magic, don't you think?
She turned her head a little to the side and her ear to him, as if she were particularly eager for that answer. Instead of an answer, however, she only heard him breathe. Cautiously, she rose and walked along the table to him. Then she stopped. She did not hear him stir, but his breathing was different from before. He must have fallen asleep. She reached out with her fingertips and touched him on the arm. She went up to his shoulder and put her hand gently on it. Then he jumped forward. The table rumbled because he banged it with the back of his right hand when he tried to draw his sword. He had fallen back onto the chair, breathing frantically and looking around, until he realized where he was and how he had got here.
I meant you no harm,
she assured him. She had taken several steps backwards and propped her hands behind her on the cupboard beside the stove.
How long?
How long what?
How long have I been lying here?
Lying? You just fell asleep.
She heard him run to the window.
You don't trust me.
She had spoken true. The sun had barely wandered. Or it had wandered all the way around once, but he didn't feel that way. The fatigue was still there.
I have enough scars on my body,
he then told her.
Some of them can tell you a few stories of a foolish boy's hope, as far as trust is concerned.
It saddens me that there's someone who suffered so much as to call such a wonderful thing foolish.
Welcome to my world.
He walked past her out of the kitchen. He took one last glance at the boy, who was still lying in bed. The bandage was tight and the wound no longer seemed to bleed so much. However, he began to mumble to himself. He knew only too well how terrible such fever dreams could be.
I'm going to get some fresh air.
You are far too exhausted.
Nonsense.
He opened the door and stepped out. But alas, she was right. The strength he had gained from the fright was nothing more than borrowed from his own body, and it was now demanding it back with interest. He wanted to walk to Asar, who was tied to a pole by the house and was grazing, but then fell to one knee.
Have you been wounded?
The woman asked him, and had put her hands on his shoulders. With a jerk from them, he freed himself from her grasp.
Don't touch me,
he demanded of her, then added,
I'm fine.
Though she answered him something, he did not listen at all. He untied Asar, mounted his back, somewhat awkwardly, and just rode off. He had to escape. He had to get away from here. He felt the wind rush past his ears and heard Asar's hooves stirring up the leaves. Surely he would,